Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 447th episode, we're covering the North American episode of Prehistoric Planet 2 and other North American information.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Dinosaur of the Day, Pectinodon.
Yes, it appears in Prehistoric Planet 2.
Episode 5, North America.
Yep.
That's why we're talking about it. And I've got a fun fact that's all about sauropods getting struck by lightning.
Oh, no.
Because it's Lightning Safety Awareness Week.
So what I'm hearing is the sauropods probably saved the turtles and other shorter animals from lightning.
Well, not necessarily, because if they attract the lightning, it might affect the animals around them too. But we'll
Can't
get
let
more
me
into
have
this.
that one. Anyway.
No, I can't. I could if it was true, but it's not. So before we get into all of that, we want to thank some of our patrons. And this week, we'd like to thank Robbo2, Othnelia, Richard, Risa, Kalosaurus Rex, Nicholas, Evelyn and Frankie, Trev, Ray, and Keith.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being a dino at all with us, and hope you enjoy all of our bonus content. All right, so dinosaurs in North America. That is a pretty broad topic.
It is. The other ones were kind of nice and specific and like a type of environment, like a swamp, an ocean, an island, badlands, and then we have North America.
Well, you could make multiple series on dinosaurs in North America alone.
I mean, there was a series called Dinosaurs in North America, or Dinosaurs Roam North America, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I still liked what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 5 locations in the last episode of Prehistoric Planet 2. The Javelina Formation, the Western Interior Seaway, the Hell Creek Formation, the Denver Formation, probably, the Lance Formation, and the Prince Creek Formation. And by 5, I mean 6 locations.
I was going to say, it seems like it was more than 5.
I'll start with the Javelina Formation. So that one, actually, if you're a Triceratops patron and above, this formation might sound familiar to you because we recently did a bonus episode all about Quetzalcoatlus and other Ashdarchids, and the Javelina Formation played a big role in that.
Yeah, that's pretty much where all or most of the Quetzalcoatlus finds are from.
Most, yeah. So it's in what's now Texas. It's from about 70 to 66.5 million years ago, and it was a woodland habitat. In terms of dinosaurs, there was the Alamosaurus, the sauropod.
Titanosaur.
Yes. Ceratopsids like Bravoceratops. Hadrosaurs like Griposaurus and Cretasaurus. Oh, also Torosaurus, if you think that Torosaurus isn't Triceratops.
Yeah, otherwise Triceratops.
Yep. Then there was Troodon, Tyrannosaurus, and Dromaeosaurs like Saurornitholestes. And then other animals, of course, you've got rays, turtles, and Quetzalcoatlus, and at least one other pterosaur.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was described as a woodland habitat because part of it was definitely considered a swamp since it would have been on the boundary with the water because you don't get rays in a forest usually.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really confirmed that there are T-rex fossils in the formation, but there have been indeterminate Tyrannosaurid fossils. So when you said Tyrannosaurs or Tyrannosaurus, you know, it's like maybe it's the right age for Tyrannosaurus. And we've got Tyrannosaurus named from, I think, as far south as like northern New Mexico, which is pretty close. So yeah, there was probably T-rex there, but it's like still not quite confirmed.
Then, of course, the Western Interior Seaway, we talked all about that in the last episode about oceans. And the Hell Creek Formation, that's another popular formation that comes up on our show. Some of the most well-known dinosaurs are from there.
Mm-hmm. And the Hell Creek and Western Interior Seaway. Actually, the Western Interior Seaway overlaps with all of these formations because it basically covered all of North America right down the middle. And all these sort of were near it, which helps with the fossilization because all that water from the seaway gives nice sediment for the fossils.
Yeah. Then the Denver Formation, I'm not actually completely sure that this was the formation in the show.
That's what it said in the press notes, though, right?
No. It didn't. It is for the scene with Pectinodon, though, which we'll get into for the Dinosaur of the Day segment. But I don't think any Pectinodon fossils had been found in what is now Colorado. In the press notes, it said this was a saline lake in Colorado. The paleo setting was.
I see. Yeah, they didn't always give the exact formation. But like you said, Pectinodon has not been found anywhere in Denver or anywhere in Colorado. So if it's a saline lake in Colorado that has Pectinodon, it's like kind of hard to say what they were going for because we haven't actually found it anywhere in Colorado. But they do have some in Wyoming, which isn't too far away. So I think they just took a little bit of creative license because it's like, we know the dinosaurs could walk
Yes.
a few miles, a couple 100 miles. Probably wouldn't have been a big deal. There weren't any big obstacles in the way. So
There were no state lines
yeah,
worried about
they
crossing.
didn't respect state or international boundaries.
Well, they didn't exist back then.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
we know of.
Plus, the scene is, I really enjoyed that scene. We'll get into it. But there's also the Arapaho Formation, which is within the Denver Basin. And although dinosaur fossils have been found there, none of them have been referred to a specific genus. So there's kind of two areas in the Denver area there. But the Denver Formation is in the central part of the Denver Basin. It's from the Late Cretaceous to early Paleocene.
So it spans the extinction event.
It does. Of course, the dinosaurs don't. But the dinosaurs that are there, you've got hadrosaurs like Edmontosaurus, then there's Pachycephalosaurus, Triceratops, Ornithomimus, and Tyrannosaurus. When you talk about North American dinosaurs in the late Cretaceous, I think Tyrannosaurus is almost everywhere.
Yeah, it's been found quite a bit, especially when you're in that sort of central part of the U.S. especially.
Then we've got the Lance Formation. That's from about 69 to 66 million years ago. It's named after Lance Creek in Wyoming.
Yeah, it's basically the same as the Hell Creek Formation, although the Lance Formation extends about 1 million years older. So sometimes you'll find a few things in the Lance Formation that you don't find in Hell Creek just because Hell Creek starts a little later.
Yeah. And it had streams and a coastal plain. It was along the edge of the Western Interior Seaway. It was a subtropical climate. There was probably a lot of rain. There were lots of birds there and other dinosaurs like Troodontids, including Pectinodon. And then you've got Tyrannosaurus, Ornithomimus, Nanotyrannus. Yep, Tyrannosaurus and Nanotyrannus.
Maybe Nanotyrannus, if it's valid.
Right. Then Ankylosaurus and Nodosaurids like Denversaurus and Edmontonia, Ceratopsians like Leptoceratops, and then depending on how you classify it, Torosaurus, Netoceratops, and Triceratops, or just Triceratops.
Oh, even Netoceratops could be Triceratops.
Then there's Pachycephalosaurus. You've got hadrosaurs like Edmontosaurus, and then other animals like pterosaurs, crocodiles, lizards, snakes, turtles, frogs, salamanders, fish, and mammals.
Sounds wet.
Yes.
I guess a lot of these formations have the same animals because they're all connected on the same continent, and we're basically just talking about the last 4 million years of the Cretaceous. So it's not surprising that we're finding the same stuff in most of them.
And if they're touching the Western Interior Seaway too, it makes sense.
Yeah, especially for the marine stuff, it just swim right up.
Yep. The Prince Creek Formation, that's another formation we've talked about a fair amount on this show because there's some cool Arctic dinosaurs.
Yeah, I like the Prince Creek. It's way up in Alaska.
Yes.
The cool thing about the Prince Creek Formation, it's also within those last 4 million-ish years of the end Cretaceous extinction event, but they've found some baby dinosaurs there. We've seen a lot of these little tiny fossils. I think we've talked about before, some of the fossils were so small that they basically fit on like the head of a pin you can use for scale. So tiny. Obviously, they were in eggs at that point. But we also have really recently hatched dinosaur bones that are very small from that area. Some of those, I think there was like a femur that was basically the diameter of like a nickel.
Yeah.
Or a penny or something like that.
Very cute.
It's crazy. And it helped to show that some of these hadrosaurs were there throughout the winter because Prince Creek is on the northern end of Alaska, which means that in order to have babies there, they would have basically had to spend year round there because they couldn't walk all the way there, lay an egg, hatch the egg, and then get the babies out of there before the winter came. They'd have to pretty much be there year round.
Yep.
And then there's also Nanooksaurus up there, which is a relative of Tyrannosaurus that we presume might have had feathers because of Tyrannus,
Mm-hmm.
but we haven't actually found feathers with it. It's a little bit of extrapolation.
And being in a cold environment, too.
Exactly, yeah. And it's even a little bit smaller than Tyrannus, so it would make sense if it had feathers. But we're starting to get a good idea about that formation. It's one of my favorites because it's sort of one of the more extreme environments, kind of like Antarctica, except in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah. So now we'll talk about the filming locations for episode 5 and the animals associated with them. Starting with in the first scene, we're on the coast of a vast inland sea that nearly splits North America. And I'm pretty sure what's now Texas, because we start off, the first dinosaurs we see is the Alamosaurus herd.
Mm-hmm.
And as adults, they weigh something like 80 tons. So predators don't really go after them while they're alive.
Yeah, they emphasize that, like, once they're this big, nothing messes with them at all.
Yep, like Dreadnoughtus, the fear-nothing dinosaur.
Yeah, of course, until they show the one that's around 70 years old and just sort of dies of old age.
Yes.
And the rest of the herd just leaves it behind totally callously, as sauropods do, just leave them to fend for themselves.
We don't know for sure.
That's true. And what were they going to do anyway? They didn't have any medicine or anything they could help it with. But the interesting thing about this is now suddenly there's 80 tons of animal immediately available for scavenging. So it goes from, nothing could possibly touch this to like the buffet is open for anything with sharp teeth or just a sharp beak, I guess. An interest in meat, maybe I should say.
Yep.
I had to double check because 80 tons is unbelievably heavy for an animal, especially an animal on land.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially the maximum weight of any land living animal that has ever been found. That's about the same as the estimates for Argentinosaurus, which is often cited as the heaviest sauropod of all time. Although there have been other contenders, that 80-ton mark is like sort of the high water mark.
It's hard to know for sure.
It is, yeah. But we base that, on like the circumference of the femur and the humerus. And we think like, okay, well, animals tend to have about this much mass on their body when they have a femur that big. Because they're sort of like, how much could that bone actually hold up? And then there's usually a safety factor because you don't want to like put too much weight on one leg and it buckles or breaks in a worst case scenario. So yeah, we have to kind of estimate, and it's hard to estimate because the only really big heavy things we have now are mammals, and they have pretty different bones. But yeah, 80 tons is roughly the estimate of what this Alamosaurus would have weighed. I'm also glad they explored what would have scavenged it.
Yes, because animals wouldn't have let good meat go to waste like that.
Yeah, 80 tons. It's crazy. So Allosaurus was long extinct by this point. So fortunately, we don't have to go down that Eryctodromius burrow again.
Oh, of how much did Allosaurus scavenge versus hunt? Yes.
Yeah, was Allosaurus the thing that scavenged all the Titanosaurs? Well, it didn't scavenge any Titanosaurs because Titanosaurs weren't around at the same time as Allosaurus.
But sauropods, yes. We've talked about it a lot at length in previous episodes.
We have.
Well, we start off with the Troodontids that tried to eat this carcass, but the skin is just way too tough for them because an Alamosaurus is huge, and by comparison, Troodontids are tiny.
Yeah, you can imagine something that weighs 80 tons. It's like an elephant times 10, basically, in terms of scale. And just like when elephants die and vultures show up sometimes first, sometimes the vultures can't actually get at any of the meat because it's sealed up behind this really tough hide, and their beaks just can't get in there. And that might be the inspiration for the Troodontids showing up. They said the Troodontids have a great sense of smell, so they showed up, which is just like a vulture would. So they just end up having to wait around for another scavenger to come, tear that hole open, and then they can really start feasting.
So luckily for the Troodontids, a T-rex comes by and starts to eat it. It's lucky in that the T-rex can get things going, get to the more tender parts of the meat, but the T-rex is so much bigger that, of course, it's got dibs now.
Yeah. Anytime the little Troodons try to sidle up, it's like, no, it's mine.
Yeah.
Go away. Which is also very similar to how it works with vultures. And like a hyena comes up, tears that hole open, starts eating, and then the vultures actually, in the videos I've seen, know their place and are like, okay, we'll just wait off to the side, and when you're done, we'll come in. There's no point in fighting over it. We know who the boss is.
Plenty to go around.
Yeah, but in this case, the Troodon was a little bit more, tried to get its nose in there a little bit.
Right, get a few bites in. I wonder if Part of the reasoning for that was to show the enormity of the Alamosaurus and the T-rex. You kind of have the Troodontids for scale.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does help.
Well, then, because this large amount of meat is going to attract more carnivores, you've got Quetzalcoatlus that appears. And the Quetzalcoatlus and the T-rex square off. And it's unclear how things are going to go until a second Quetzalcoatlus appears, and together they scare off the T-rex. So not necessarily what you think will happen when it comes to Tyrannosaurus Rex fighting another animal.
Yeah. This was maybe the one scene in Prehistoric Planet 2 that I completely did not expect.
Mm-hmm.
There was, if you asked me before watching this show, what would win in a fight, a Quetzalcoatlus or a T-rex? Or say you've got a sauropod and there's a Quetzalcoatlus and a T-rex, which one gets dibs?
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like, no question, the T-rex, because it's so much bigger. One bite from that T-rex mouth is going to completely incapacitate the Quetzalcoatlus.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you see the way they depicted it, where the Quetzalcoatlus can fly, it's got that insanely long beak, much longer than a T-rex head, and with that extra long giraffe neck.
Yeah.
It's got so much more reach. It's like a boxer with a 10-foot reach going against a boxer with like a 2-foot reach. There's just no chance, right? And it's got that really sharp, pointy beak at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Unless T-Rex is really hungry and willing to just like, okay, I know I can win this fight. I don't care if I get pecked a couple times along the way, and just sort of like go blitzkrieg at the Quetzalcoatlus, then the T-Rex is better off just leaving, because that beak is just too menacing.
Yes.
Especially when there's two of them. I'd say in this situation, it's sort of like when the lion shows up after the hyena, and then you've got another level. You know, it's like starts out with the vulture and the hyena, and then the lion shows up, and now the hyena's waiting, and then the vulture is just adding up in terms of who gets to eat first.
It's kind of interesting because it's another example of predators teaming up to get their food. But then it makes me wonder, why was the T-Rex by itself? Because in previous episodes, we've seen T-Rex hunting together.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you get that with wolves and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
There are lone wolves, even though they're usually in a wolf pack.
Or maybe it's different because it wasn't actively hunting. It just found this carcass.
Yeah.
Went for it.
Yeah, and it could be that it has young somewhere else, or who knows what the story is.
Yeah.
I dug into this a little bit deeper because I was curious for a modern comparison between a bird and a mammal, because that's the closest I could come up with. There aren't any big scavenging birds that are flightless. So you can't do a good comparison to like something that's a T-Rex unless you pick a mammal, basically. So the thing that I ended up finding was raptor birds and dogs. They sometimes interact. So hawks and owls specifically sometimes attack dogs. I found a couple of anecdotal reports of hawks and eagles killing Pomeranians.
Oh.
But these dogs only weigh about 8 to 10 pounds, which doesn't sound like much, but it turns out the great horned owl and the red-tailed hawk are more like 3 pounds. So they're weighing about a quarter to a third as much as the dog. And that's showing you how those raptors really punch above their weight.
Yeah.
Even nowadays, in terms of how much of a threat they are for their size.
They've got good weapons.
They do. They also have such light skeletons that they're just so much more powerful pound for pound than you get compared to a mammal. I should say, though, raptor attacks on dogs are extremely rare, but dogs and raptors aren't competing for food the way this Quetzalcoatlus and T-Rex were. So you can see how that would be a bigger problem. There's also an urban legend that owls or hawks carry off pets. I found a lot of these cases, but then there are lots of people who are experts on birds, and they're like, no, these raptor birds cannot lift more than their own weight, and usually a fraction of their own weight. And pretty much every dog or cat weighs more than 3 pounds. Red-tailed hawks are not swooping in and picking up 10-pound dogs. It's just not going to happen.
Well, that's good to know if you own a dog.
Yeah. But if you have a 6-ton T-Rex versus a pair of quarter-ton Quetzalcoatlus, even though that weight difference is even bigger than like the hawk versus Pomeranian, that Quetzalcoatlus is just that beak and everything. I could see why they came up with what they did, because they could easily poke an eye out or something on that T-Rex.
Yeah, it was a really enjoyable scene and interesting. Made you rethink some things. From the press notes, it took about 600 days to animate just that scene.
Oh, man. It was a fantastic scene. It's definitely one of my favorite scenes.
Same.
And I love that they took a stab at answering that whole sauropod carcass scavenging question.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about more scenes in Prehistoric Planet 2, but first, let's take a quick break for our sponsors. In the next scene in episode 5 of Prehistoric Planet 2, we're back in the ocean. We're around North America. I think the Gulf of Mexico is what they said. And we see Globidens, the mosasaur, swimming. And this is a scene between a mosasaur and tiger ammonites, Sphenodiscus specifically, because the females, they're coming from the deep water and going to the coast carrying hundreds of fertilized eggs. So they're going to lay their eggs in a shallow area. So the Globidens is waiting for all the ammonites. And it's really interesting. It ends up disabling a bunch of them by snapping at them and cracking their shell. So they kind of fall to the sea floor.
It was kind of sad.
It was kind of sad. But then that way, the Globidens is able to eat when it wants.
Yeah. Store up some food.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't get all of them. So some of those ammonites do, or a lot of them, end up laying their eggs. And the cycle goes on. To film the T-Rex and Quetzalcoatlus scene, the team went to Wairariki Beach in New Zealand, which is famous for its archway islands. And if you look up a picture of it, you will probably recognize right away that scene. As soon as I saw it, I was like, yep, those are those archways that are in the background of that fighting scene.
Yep, I felt that way with the Mono Lake one too. I was looking up pictures and I was like, oh yeah, that's the place.
Mm-hmm. In the next scene, we're at that salty lake, and it's the beginnings of the Rocky Mountains forming. It's really harsh conditions, but we've got Styginetta and Pectinodon there, specifically to eat all the flies.
Yeah, this one took a little bit of time to figure out what they were going for exactly, because Styginetta is considered a nomen nudum, or a naked name in Latin, because it's never actually been officially named.
Yeah, I read it was part of someone's thesis.
It was, yeah. It was written in a thesis about 22 years ago by Thomas Stidham, who is a practicing paleontologist. He works at a museum in China now and has published a ton of stuff. I wonder if now that this dinosaur/bird is sort of a household name, if that's going to inspire him to get that thesis published and peer-reviewed, because I would want to, right? If you've got a dinosaur that like everybody knows about, you'd want to officially get it named. Otherwise, someone else can swoop in and name it something else or change it up somehow. But I couldn't find his complete thesis anywhere. I'm guessing they picked it for Prehistoric Planet 2 because it's reportedly one of the only birds that's known to have survived the KPG boundary.
Oh.
And I presume that means that they've found fossils both before and after the end Cretaceous extinction. It might only be like just after, but like close enough after that they assume like, okay, well, it was probably there right before too.
Well done, Styginetta.
Yeah, I think that's why they have it. It's also a really cool looking animal. And there are others in this group, but I think most of them, if not all of the other ones, are after the KPG boundary, a little bit after too. So we couldn't really say like, okay, it's this one, because that would be like, for example, Presbyornis. Those fossils are about 4 million years after dinosaurs went extinct. So that's a little bit too long of a gap to be like, well, we're just going to fudge it and say that it was there with the other dinosaurs, because it probably wasn't. And Presbyornis is really cool. It looks just like Styginetta did in Prehistoric Planet 2, sort of a flamingo duck hybrid. And Presbyornis is also the type genus for the family Presbyornithidae that includes Styginetta. So that's, if you know what Presbyornis looks like, this is a really close relative of Styginetta, then you can sort of connect the dots. AMNH has a really good summary of Presbyornis where they say it's, quote, a relative of living ducks, had a long neck, tall legs, webbed feet, and a duck-like head. Based on fossil evidence, scientists think that these extinct birds nested together in large colonies at the edge of lakes. No one knows if it quacked. Which I just think is delightful. I love the idea of a flamingo that quacks.
Yes, me too.
With a duck head. Presbyornis also had webbed feet based on trackways found right by the fossilized bone. Webbed feet are very handy. We were just talking about that in the last episode.
Yep.
One surprising thing is that they think that Presbyornis, and probably by extension Styginetta, were filter feeders like flamingos. But even though they had that flamingo body, they were supposed to have a duck-like head. So why is the duck head filter feeding? The ducks go, they fish, basically. Flamingos are the ones that filter feed, so...
They did have, in Prehistoric Planet, they made the Styginetta a little bit pink, or streaks of pink.
Oh, they did? I
Yeah.
didn't notice that. That's great. Yeah, so we'll have to see if Styginetta gets officially named soon. If it does, we'll definitely point it out.
Yeah, so both Styginetta and Pectinodon, again, they're drawn to this area it's got poisonous water because it's so salty, but there are so many flies there. It's a seasonal thing because the larva filters out the lake's toxic salts and they thrive there. We see a father Pectinodon and a bunch of babies. It's really cute.
Yeah, I always want to say what the size of these animals are because we don't have any sort of scale perspective. I actually saw somebody who photoshopped in people next to the dinosaurs so you can kind of tell how big they are. But I think the babies at most are about 20 pounds. They're pretty small because they're still in fluffy phase. The dad reminds me a lot of paleo art of Dakota Raptor.
Oh, yeah,
the way it's drawn. But Pectinodon was way smaller than Dakota Raptor. It's more on like a almost Deinonychus type scale, or like a little bit bigger than a velociraptor. It's a fairly small dinosaur. And Sabrina's going to talk more about it in the Dinosaur of the Day, I'm sure. So I don't want to step on too many toes.
Yep.
I'm not sure how tall Pectinodon was, but its close relative Presbyornis was about 3 feet or 1 meter tall. So I'm guessing a little bit shorter because its legs looked proportionally a little bit shorter than like the full flamingo Presbyornis one. So the Styginetta duck flamingos in there were maybe like 2 feet tall. I'm not sure. And that would make it quite a bit shorter than actual flamingos today. Flamingos today, sort of the minimum height for a lot of adults is like 4 feet. They can get up to like 5.5 feet. So yeah, flamingos are pretty big.
Well, the baby Pectinodon in Prehistoric Planet 2, they're interested in the millions and millions of flies, and the flies are a good source of protein. They show them chasing after the flies like seagulls in the Salton Sea.
Yeah, that was exactly what I thought of too. That might have been in a Planet Earth, actually. I can't remember what documentary we saw that in.
Yeah.
And they showed 2 different birds. There was something like a swift or something that could fly and just individually pick the flies out of the air. And then like, and here's how the seagull does it. It just opens its mouth and just like runs face first through. And that's exactly how they show those baby Pectinodon.
I think it was also a David Attenborough narrated documentary.
Yeah, it feels that way in my head, whether or not it actually was. The Salton Sea also has a lot of migratory birds, like they describe Styginetta being. So I think that also is a factor in that comparison.
Well, and Styginetta being flamingo-like, because in that other show, that's where they had the parade of flamingos, which actually, the Styginetta looked like they were ready to do their own parade.
Yeah, that would have been great.
Yeah. And that inspired some art we did a few years ago for our patrons.
The Parasaurolophus parade. But that reminds me of when we were talking to the producers and they were saying animals do the weirdest stuff. And if we had the dinosaurs do it in this show, people would be like, no, that's fake. For sure, if they showed the Styginetta doing the parade that flamingos actually do in real life, people would be like, what is this? What kind of goofy nonsense did you make up?
That would be amazing.
It would be.
I would love to see that. Some blooper scenes or something, except those blooper scenes would take like hundreds or thousands of hours to make.
Yeah.
Well, back to the scene. The father Pectinodon, which is reddish in color, it stalks the Styginetta because the flies aren't enough for the whole family, and it jumps up and chomps down on one neck. And then it's able to feed all the babies.
Yeah. It kind of looked to me like that it was using its wings a little bit because it sort of has like wing-ish things that are way too small for its body in terms of being able to fly. But it looked like it might have been using them a little bit to get some extra air on the way hopping up to catch the bird as it was taking off, which I think might have been what they were going for there with like, look, it's using its, even though it doesn't have its wings in like full flight ability, it could be like a ground up hypothesis of like taking bigger and bigger jumps until eventually it's got full-blown wings that it could fly with.
Yeah. So to film that scene, you kind of mentioned earlier, Garrett, it was Mono Lake Tufa State Natural Reserve in California, and that's near Yosemite National Park. It was established in 1981 to preserve the limestone tufa tower formations at Mono Lake.
Yeah, and those are the things you can really see in the
Yeah.
seed.
Yeah, they're these spires and knobs of calcium carbonate that form between freshwater springs and alkaline lake water when they're interacting.
They're really cool looking.
They are.
It kind of looks like a huge termite mound that's like decomposing into like a skeletal looking thing, or maybe like an ancient coral reef, which is the same thing, calcium carbonate.
And I know we weren't the only ones who kind of recognized Mono Lake, because there was at least one person on Twitter who, I think this is Mono Lake.
Yep.
According to the press notes, flies were a problem when they were filming this scene because there were billions of flies, and they sometimes looked like a black wall, so the flies would clog up the equipment, especially the camera, and cleaning the camera in the field was really difficult because they couldn't get away from the flies.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's the thing about when you get out of the cities and suburbs and into like real nature, flies, man. There's just so many flies everywhere. I can't handle it. I can't handle the flies.
Well, moving on from the flies, the next scene is all about Triceratops. And for a little bit, you can see the baby Triceratops milling around. They're very cute. I wish there was a little more baby Triceratops in there.
It would be nice. It'd be fun if they did a spin-off that was just like all the babies.
Yeah. The main focus of the scene is the adult Triceratops that are competing for mates, and they show them fighting each other with their horns. And one wins, the older one, and gets to have a mate, and the younger one loses a piece of horn.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a documentary we watched where there was a similar fight between Triceratops, and one of the Triceratops got its horn broken, and then it was sort of like hanging?
Oh, that sounds very familiar, but I can't remember which one.
I thought it was Walking with Dinosaurs, but I rewatched the scene, or the only scene I know of that has Triceratops in it, and I didn't see it in there. So I don't know. If anybody knows, let us know what that is. But it was very reminiscent of that to me. But of course, in the other show, the Triceratops ends with this like broken, awful, dangling horn thing going on. Whereas in Prehistoric Planet 2, it sort of snapped off more cleanly and didn't look quite as gruesome. So I guess that was at least a plus for this Triceratops.
We do think that Triceratops did fight each other because there's some evidence. Like, I think Big John, the Triceratops, there's evidence of wounds that are in the process of healing when that specimen died.
I think you said there was like a full-blown hole in the frill, right?
I don't know if that was for Big John, but there are other Triceratops fossils where, we can see evidence that, yes, they use their horns against each other.
I knew about in their little making of thing, they show the little scratches on the frill, but I know, after you were talking about that, they actually punched full holes through is very impressive.
I think so.
It was interesting to me that they said the Triceratops with 1 meter long horns is less attractive because it didn't have scars. I wonder what that's based on. I couldn't find a reference to something because usually it's like the bigger the structure and like the brighter and more pristine it is, the better. But I guess it's always possible that you could look too green.
Yeah.
They also said the 30-year-old weighed over 10 tons, which was really surprising to me because I had to check. I was like, did Triceratops get up to 10 tons? And the very, very upper estimate of like the heaviest Triceratops is more like 9.5, 9.6 tons. So I think they're sort of pushing that a little bit and saying like, well, maybe if you've got a group of, dozens of these, ultimate biggest one, because we usually don't find the very biggest fossils because we just get whatever random sampling we get, could have been over 10 tons. I guess that's possible. And his horns on that 10-ton one looked insanely long. They said the smaller one had the 1 meter horns, but it looked like the larger one had something more like a 2 meter or 6 foot horns. They looked so huge, those horns on it. And that might be reasonable with a keratin covering. That could be possible because a keratin covering could maybe double the length of a horn from just the bone part that we usually see fossilized. Even if it was 2 meters or 6 feet long, it would still be way shorter than something like a mammoth tusk. The longest mammoth tusks are over twice that length, although they're not the best comparison since tusks are teeth and not horns. But that might actually make it even crazier that the mammoth tusks are so big.
Yes. Can you imagine if your teeth grew that large?
Yeah, 14-foot tooth.
So to film this scene with the Triceratops, the team went to Winterfold Forest in Surrey in the UK, which is a woodland and a popular place for hiking and cycling. A lot of these places are popular for hiking.
Yeah. There's only so many things you're allowed to do in the wilderness these days.
Mm.
In the old days, they'd probably be popular for logging and things like that, but now they're parks.
In the last scene of this episode, we go to the cold far north in the Arctic Circle, where the sun barely rises for 3 months of the year, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine I would be so depressed.
Yeah, I can't handle that.
And that's where we see Ornithomimus running around together looking for food, and they kind of look like a chicken pecking at the ground.
Yeah, I thought of an ostrich, especially since they needed to cover so much ground to find food, like ostriches in the Australian outback, just sort of like flocking in these big groups, trying to find anything, any little scrub to chomp down.
Well, they're not alone for long because we've got a Nanooksaurus hunting them. And Nanooksaurus, it's more agile than T-rex, probably because it's smaller. There's nowhere for it to hide in this scene, so it can't surprise attack the Ornithomimus.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Nanooksaurus was definitely more agile than T-rex because even though it was about half the length, it could have been as little as 1/10 of the weight because that's how these things always scale. As you get longer, they also get wider, so they end up weighing way more. Even the low estimate of 5 meters and 16 feet and 500 kilograms is roughly 1,000 pounds, which means it was still a lot bigger than Ornithomimus, even though it was such a small fraction of T-rex.
That's amazing. So, yeah, Nanooksaurus tries to panic the Ornithomimus by rushing them, and they all run. But at first, Nanooksaurus isn't fast enough. Then it is able to kind of surprise them and runs after them again, and one Ornithomimus breaks away, so Nanooksaurus chases after it and manages to get that one. And then it takes the Ornithomimus back to its babies.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by the scale of the Ornithomimus because it is a lot shorter than Nanooksaurus, but by length, it should have been only about 1 meter or 3 feet shorter. And then it was a lot lighter weight, though, probably 1/3 of the weight of Nanooksaurus.
Yeah.
But to me, it looked pretty small in Prehistoric Planet. Maybe it was like a juvenile or something. But yeah, it's definitely likely that an Ornithomimus would outrun Nanooksaurus in most situations. Although if one slips like it did in Prehistoric Planet, it's always possible that it gets caught. And that Nanooksaurus might have been desperate to feed its babies, so trying a difficult hunt might be worth it. Animals do that kind of stuff all the time. I also like that it was hunting them in the cold because that means it sort of has built-in refrigeration.
Oh, yeah.
Just like an Inuit hunting a whale, they can drag it out on the ice and then eat it all winter. You could do the same thing with the Nanooksaurus and this Ornithomimus because considering that Nanooksaurus weighed, 1,000 to 2,000 pounds, and the Ornithomimus weighed about 400 pounds, it would have been hard to eat all that meat before it spoiled, even with the help of those cute, fluffy little baby Nanooksaurus.
That's true. So to film this last scene, the team went to Margar County, Montana, which has a population of about 1,900 people. It's surrounded by mountains, and the Smith River runs through it, so it's good for fishing.
Yeah, that was a cool scene.
It was.
I liked the way the red on the Ornithomimus popped with the white snowy ground.
Me too.
And the little head tufts.
Yeah, it was a good episode. We started by saying oh, that's a lot of dinosaurs to cover in North America, but I liked the ones that they chose and the settings they put them in.
Especially that scene of the scavenging of the Alamosaurus and the Troodon getting supplanted by the T-rex, getting supplanted by the Quetzalcoatlus is great.
Yeah.
And in just a moment, we'll get back to Pectinodon for our dinosaur of the day. But first, we're going to pause for one last sponsor break.
And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Pectinodon, which, as you know, appears in episode 5 of Prehistoric Planet Season 2. It was a Troodontid that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now Wyoming, in the Lance Formation. It probably looked bird-like with feathers and long legs, and being a Troodontid, it would have had the sickle claws on the second toes. But we only know this dinosaur from its teeth.
Yeah. I mean, Troodontids are like that, I guess.
I guess so. I'll say so far. You never know what fossils might come up later. As a troodontid, it may have had good vision and it may have gone after small prey. The type and only species is Pectinodon bakkeri. The genus name means comb tooth, and it refers to those comb-like serrations on the teeth. And the species name is in honor of Bob Bakker. It was described in 1982 by Kenneth Carpenter. He named it in a paper about baby dinosaurs from the Lance and Hell Creek formations. And he studied 11 taxa from 9 localities based on small teeth and parts of the skulls that were found by screen washing, which is underwater washing and screening.
Like panning for gold, kind of?
Yeah, but panning for baby dinosaur teeth and parts of skulls.
I would be so much more excited finding a baby dinosaur tooth than a little flake of gold.
So this study helped show that baby dinosaurs weren't as rare as paleontologists previously thought. The holotype of Pectinodon is a tooth, and then the paratypes and the referred specimens are also teeth. He found, quote, crowns of teeth strongly compressed laterally and recurved.
So curved, pretty flat, and serrated.
Yep. Pectinodon was described as an apparently small species weighing under 220 pounds or 100 kilograms. The holotype, it's a tooth, but it's an adult tooth. It's the largest tooth. It's 6.2 millimeters long and 3.7 millimeters wide. If you want that in inches, that's about 0.2 inches by 0.1 inches.
Very small.
Yes.
I feel like the one in Prehistoric Planet 2, they made a little bit bigger.
Yes. Well, maybe. And the paratypes, the teeth are small and probably come from baby Pectinodon. But the other referred teeth are from adults. The teeth look similar to Saurornithoides inequalis, which was previously referred to Troodon formosus and Saurornithoides junior. He said that the teeth look similar to velociraptor teeth, but some slight differences in the serrations. And Pectinodon has been considered to be synonymous with Troodon formosus. But in 1991, George Olszewski found it to be its own species, Troodon bakkeri.
Oh, interesting, yeah. Because Troodon formosus, also just teeth. So depending on how similar those teeth are, could get lumped together.
Yes, in 2011, Lindsay Zano and others analyzed how troodontids were classified and found all the specimens assigned to Troodon formosus were probably different species and agreed that Pectinodon bakkeri was valid. In 2008, Longrich also found Pectinodon to be valid. And in 2013, Phil Curry and Derek Larson found Pectinodon to be valid and said the teeth could be found in both the Lance Formation and Hell Creek Formation. So a lot of people think, yes, this is a valid dinosaur.
That's good. I wish there was more than just teeth, but...
There are other teeth from Dinosaur Park Formation referred to Pectinodon.
Oh, good. More teeth.
It's a CF. It's hard to classify specifically. And then in 1985, Lev Nesov named a second species, Pectinodon asiaamericanus, based on a tooth found in Uzbekistan, but that one's considered to be a Nomen dubium.
Yeah, that tooth, not good enough. The other teeth, plenty good. And our fun fact of the day is that sauropods would have been very vulnerable to lightning strikes, and not just because they're so tall.
Okay. Well, now I'm curious.
Yeah. So, being the third full week of June, of course, that means it's Lightning Safety Awareness Week.
Oh, of course.
I just learned this and I couldn't resist tying it into a dinosaur fun fact somehow. So, Lightning Safety Awareness Week is a campaign by the National Weather Service in the US. Lightning kills about 20 people and injures hundreds of people in the US alone every year.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, so a lot of times when they say those things like, well, you're more likely to get struck by lightning than blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, you're kind of likely to get struck by lightning. You're definitely way more likely to get struck by lightning than bit by a shark, because a lot of people get struck by lightning. Not that many people get bit by a shark. Sabrina, I know you hate lightning.
Yep.
But fortunately, the Pacific coast has the least lightning in all of the country, and that's where we live.
Good job me for living here.
I remember finding that out one time we were watching the weather, and they're like, there's a thunderstorm today. It might be the only one of the year. And I was like, oh, that's nice. It's nice to know. As a first bonus fun fact, lightning often strikes the same place repeatedly.
Oh, no.
So that myth about lightning never hits the same place twice is completely wrong. For example, the Empire State Building alone gets hit over 20 times a year. And that's been going on for like 100 years. So yes, it can hit the same exact spot over and over and over again. The main factors are how tall something is, how pointy it is, and what's around it. And the Empire State Building is very tall, very pointy, and taller than anything else around it, so it just gets hit over and over again. The take-home message from NWS is that nowhere outside is safe when thunderstorms are in the area. As they put it, quote, "If you hear thunder, lightning is close enough to strike you," end quote.
Oh, so get inside.
Yes, exactly. Because lightning, it can strike one point, and then just a couple seconds later, it can be like 9 kilometers or like 5 miles away. It can, storms are really big, and the static buildup can be all over the place. So, you want to get into a building, but not just any building. You want to make sure it either has plumbing or electrical wires, because those are both grounded, and the lightning will be drawn to that instead of to you inside the building. If you're near a car with a metal roof, you want to get in and roll up the windows. The metal cage of the car helps to keep the electricity away from you. It actually made me wonder, because a lot of like new fancy cars have glass roofs. I don't think those actually protect you as well from lightning, because they very clearly specify convertibles do not protect you, because you need the actual metal roof. That's where the lightning's coming from. So if you have a choice between vehicles, metal roof is better. But obviously none of this works for dinosaurs.
No, they didn't have cars.
They didn't have plumbing. They didn't have electricity.
No buildings.
Yeah. But the dinosaurs at most risk would have been the ones on hills, mountain ranges, or other elevated areas, as well as those in wide open areas, because they're the tallest, pointiest thing around. Being elevated or in the open can lead to a direct lightning strike.
I think that's what happened to Mary Anning when she was a child.
Really? Jeez.
She was struck by lightning.
Yeah, direct lightning strikes are probably the most deadly type of lightning strike, since the electricity moves right through and around the body. It often causes really bad burns, but in addition, the electricity tends to go through blood vessels, the nervous system, and the heart, which are not places you want large amounts of electricity and heat to go through. In 2022, last year, one person in a parking lot and one person on a roof were both killed by lightning strikes.
Oh.
Yeah, they publish all the statistics on who gets struck by lightning, which is part of the safety awareness, because you can see all the different situations. Really, whenever you hear thunder, you want to be inside. When it comes to dinosaurs, we really don't know about whether they were in open fields or really about dinosaurs that lived on mountaintops, period, very well, because mountaintops don't have the sediment to fossilize. But hopefully, any dinosaurs who wandered up there would leave during a storm. Maybe there's an instinctive, it's raining, I don't want to be on top of a mountain right now. This is really hard for large sauropods, though, especially because they sort of turn any area into an elevated area with their really high body. And obviously, any dinosaur, sauropod or otherwise, that's standing in an open area would be at risk for a direct strike. In addition to direct strikes, there's also a type of lightning strike called a side flash. Basically, that's when lightning hits something tall, often a tree, and then if you're standing next to it, it sort of jumps to you halfway down the tree and then goes through you rather than the rest of the tree.
Oh, no.
So that happens pretty often. I think that's the second most common type of lightning strike. The direct strike, I think, is the least common of the three.
Oh.
Dinosaurs obviously would have been at risk for this too, because if they're standing near a tree, there were plenty of trees back then, they could have been hit. In terms of people, we know one person died last year doing yard work in a storm, and they were near a tree, and they got the side strike. And also a single strike last year killed 3 people hiding from a storm together beneath a tree near the White House, actually. They were in the park by the White House, and they sat under the tree.
Oh,
so
no.
Do not hide under trees during thunderstorms. People always say that, but it actually is a really big risk.
That's sad.
Yeah.
I think I remember hearing that story when it happened. That was really sad. It was I want to say it was a couple who were visiting DC on vacation, and then a third person who was just trying to shelter from the storm a little bit.
I think you're right, because there was a male, they published the age and the gender of the people, so it was like a mid-70s man and woman together. So yeah, I presume they were the tourists. It is very sad and tragic. And you could see how in that situation, when you're on vacation and your hotel might be really far away and it starts raining, that you think, I'll go under a tree, that's the safest place to be. But you'd actually be better off just going and sitting on a park bench, for example, if you can't make it anywhere else. This also would have been a problem for sauropods because even if they were just eating leaves off a tree, that means their head is right next to the tree. So presumably they could get that side strike. And doubly so if it's an isolated tree without many tall objects around it. Bodies of water are also dangerous with lightning in the area. Water doesn't attract lightning. That's one of the myths about lightning. It doesn't attract it, but it conducts it really well. So you can be farther away from the actual direct hit of the lightning and still be killed or seriously injured by it. Just like in Prehistoric Planet, I think you talked about the crew had to evacuate the swamp when there was lightning in the area.
Mhm.
That was very smart of them because that swamp would be conductive and you don't want to be in it when there's lightning nearby. Last year, I found 5 people that were killed in bodies of water. There were 2 people jet skiing, 2 people rowing boats, and 1 person floating in a river.
Oh, this is a very dark fun fact.
It's meant to be awareness for things that you shouldn't be doing when there's lightning out and that you need to be inside. The floating down a river was kind of surprising to me because you'd think you're low down, and being
Mhm.
low down, you might be less likely to get struck. But actually, the way lightning hits people, it usually isn't the direct lightning hitting the tall object. It's people near the tall object or people in something conductive like water and then still being affected even if they're not directly hit. So on a lighter note, dinosaurs also would have been affected by this. For example, a Spinosaurus standing in a swamp definitely would be at risk of getting hit by lightning or injured by lightning, as would any of the swimming dinosaurs like Hesperornis. And of course, so would sauropods if they were, for example, looking for horsetails in swamps, something that some species certainly did since horsetails were one of the most nutritious foods available to them.
Seems like there was almost nothing a dinosaur could do to stay safe.
There is. I'm going to get to the happy how to avoid it at the end.
Okay.
But first, I got to get through all the ways you can get hit by lightning.
Of
So
course.
the last one is very interesting to me and something that I had not heard at all until researching this. And that's that lying flat on the ground is a really bad idea in lightning. It seems like something you'd want to do because, hey, if I get lower, the lightning's less likely to hit me. But this goes back to the direct strikes are not the main way people get killed by lightning. The biggest of the 3 is actually from something called ground current from lightning. When lightning hits the ground, it actually travels outward across the Earth's surface. The electricity does.
Mhm.
And if you're standing on that ground, it's likely to go through your body.
Oof.
And again, when it goes through your body, it goes through the closest point to the lightning strike, up into your body, through your cardiovascular and or nervous system, and then it leaves out the point farthest from the lightning strike. The greater that distance is, the higher the risk for injury and death. So lying down just increases that distance. If you imagine you're standing up and your 2 feet are, like a few inches to a foot apart, that's not great. But if you're lying down, it could be 5-6 feet apart. That's a long distance and that's more deadly. This is the reason why a lot of quadrupedal animals get killed by ground current from lightning strikes. They have relatively wide stances, and that means that distance between the entrance and the exit of the electricity is pretty far. There are multiple cases of hundreds of animals dying from a single lightning strike. In 2016, 323 reindeer were killed on a plateau in Norway from a ground current effect from lightning.
I think we talked about this on the show at one point.
I think so too. And this means that bipedal dinosaurs would have been less likely to be affected by ground strike lightning, but quadrupedal dinosaurs with that wider stance would have been in worse shape. And obviously, the larger the animal, the wider the stance.
Oh no, sauropods.
There goes sauropods again. That might have actually been the biggest problem for sauropods because that ground effect is the biggest problem, and they had the widest stance of any dinosaur. So what could sauropods do? So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has recommendations for workers that are caught in thunderstorms without shelter and what they can do. So the biggest thing is that for sauropods, they'd want to lower their head.
Mhm.
You don't want to be the tallest object around, but you also don't want to touch the ground with your face because then you're spreading out that ground contact area.
Really, you just want to be floating in the air.
Maybe. It could still go through you midair like an airplane.
You don't have to worry about the ground current that way.
Oh, true. Yeah. What they really should do, though, is walk downhill if they're up high, try to get out of any wide open areas, and avoid isolated high trees. Also, if they can, the really ideal situation is to get into a dense area of smaller trees, which are surrounded by larger trees. Because if there are larger trees sort of in the general vicinity, those are going to be the things that get hit by lightning. And then if you're near the smaller trees, they are taller than you. So that's sort of your optimal situation. You can also go for something like a low-lying area, like a valley, as long as there isn't flooding filling that valley.
Okay.
So maybe, or even maybe halfway down into like a valley or like the bank of a river or something like that. Those are the ideal places if you're ever caught out and there's no way you can get to shelter. That's where you should be. And obviously that's where sauropods should have gone if they could, because they didn't have any shelter. So remember, if you hear thunder, go inside. And if you can't get inside, stay off high places, out of wide open spaces, out of the water, and keep away from tall things like trees. Also, important to know that people that are struck by lightning aren't dangerous after the fact. So if you can try to take them to a safe location. And if you know how to give CPR and they need it, you can give it to them safely.
Good tips. I hope we never need to use them.
Yeah.
I don't know how fun that fun fact was.
I know, it's a little bit of a downer, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I didn't realize how many people get struck by lightning.
I didn't either.
It's important to stay inside.
Well, on that note, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned because next week we're finally going to be diving into that episode we promised a few weeks ago on the Dinosauroid.
Yeah, the creepy Troodon evolving into a human form thing.
Spoilers. I wasn't going to give it away, but here we are. If you want more dinosaur goodness in your inbox, then head over to iknowdino.com and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks again, and until next time.